Welcome, everyone, to the Fluid Operations Podcast. This is our very first episode of this podcast. My name is Miller Truby. With me is my co-host, Kirk Wessel, and we are going to be taking you through some of the issues that operators face in the water treatment and water distribution, water collections industry. The idea of this podcast is to talk about what operators do on a day-to-day basis, what their challenges are, what works, what doesn't work, with an eye toward future operations, future technologies, things that are going to make operators' lives better, hopefully, or maybe just different as the industry kind of comes into the 21st century. So to start things off today, I think we're going to introduce ourselves a little bit and tell you a little bit about who we are within this space, and then what this podcast is going to be. And then we'll jump into a conversation today. And then we'll end off by talking about what this podcast is going to be going forward and how often. So, Kirk, welcome to our first episode, and it's great to be doing this. Why don't you give us an idea of who you are and what your experience in the industry is, and then we'll go from there.
This is how we start. So obviously, thanks for the introduction, Miller. Great introduction. Yeah, it's exactly what we're trying to do here is to really just kind of capture what people don't really know about the operators in this space, how they're managing the workload, the invisibility of their work. We flush, it goes. We turn on the faucet, it comes. So that's what we expect. And there is a mass of people that manage that. So we really want to start talking to them and figuring that out. But to introduce myself, I'm Kirk Wessel. Been in this space probably close to 20 years now. A lot of my time has been spent in secondary treatment processes. So wastewater treatment plants, spent a lot of time in wastewater treatment plants, secondary treatment side specifically. So aeration, fixed film, odor control systems for a stint, and then really gravitated towards this digital side, self-tuning plants in the last 3 years. So that's kind of where my focus has been and why I joined the Turing company recently, and been here since February of 2024, and excited about the path we're going on and where we're going to take this into the water and wastewater utilities that protect our waterways.
Yeah, perfect. And you have an interesting view, I think, Kirk, being that you are located. Recently you were in Wisconsin for a number of years,
Mhm.
so getting a view of sort of the upper Midwest and things going on up there specifically. I know you had a lot of connections up there, and then recently moved to South Carolina, where you now have a very different view of the challenges that the southeastern United States faces, which are different, I think, from what the upper Midwest experiences. Certainly the winters are a little different.
Yeah, most definitely. Now, winters, how far you bury pipes. You can't bury a pipe a foot deep in
Right,
Wisconsin. That doesn't work too well.
right.
But you can here in South Carolina, which is where I'm now hanging my hat. So, yeah, that's a great point. There are different challenges with obviously the Great Lakes surrounding Wisconsin.
Yep.
Those bring challenges. The Mississippi River brings challenges. So, lots of lakes, rivers, and streams in Wisconsin. But then you move down here into the southeast and you've got brackish water, you have tides, you have all these different ways that you have to look at the water. So it's a very unique perspective and learning curve from collections to the wastewater treatment and how they have to manage all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I'm sure different for you too, in a mindset in terms of coastal versus not coastal. I know that we heard about that recently, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. We heard about that
Yep.
recently at a conference. There are some interesting, unique issues that come up when you're coastal versus not coastal. Um,
Absolutely. Well, introduce yourself too, Mel. We gotta see
yep.
who you are and what your background is, so that everyone knows who we are before we start this fluid operations podcast here.
Absolutely. So my name is Miller Truby. I am the customer success manager for Turing. So Kirk and I work together quite a lot. I've been with the company for just over 3 years now, through a couple of name changes and sort of organizational changes. But we are, approaching this digital transformation and digital platform that we do through the lens of customer success, or at least I am. So trying to make sure that customers have what they need and all that. But I come from more of the drinking water and desalination side of the industry. I've been in it for about 18 years now, which is terrifying when I think about that. It doesn't feel like 18 years has gone by since I started,
Mhm.
but it has. Uh, so yeah, coming at it from the standpoint of people, primarily with membrane systems, treating difficult to treat waters with sort of advanced treatment processes like RO, and trying to struggle through the process of how do we analyze and keep track of what these systems are doing? How do we stay on top of the maintenance required to keep these systems running? Membrane systems especially seem to be um, maintenance hogs, so to speak. I think there are a lot of extra struggles there because you have this very expensive consumable item in the RO membranes at these plants that has to really be taken care of. So I've spent a lot of my career supporting operators in that space, doing troubleshooting, doing system startups, even doing things like warranty claims for some of the membrane providers and then some of the chemical manufacturers, trying to determine what happened to these membranes, and how can we prevent that from happening in the future. And through that process, for me, I have become something of a crusader. I don't use that word lightly, but I have become something of a crusader for doing a better job of recording data and information and being able to share that data and information out with the world at large when you need help, because that was something that I always faced and struggled with when trying to do troubleshooting at some of these sites that I ended up going to, was not being able to get the information that I needed to understand what was going on, or more commonly, not being able to readily share that information around to the parties that needed to be able to see it in order to get a positive outcome. And that was always very frustrating for me.
Mhm.
And again, going back to the early 2000s, when I really started out before, I guess what we call, industry 2.0, or a utility 2.0, the digital
Right.
world, as it were. That stuff was hard to do. A lot of handwritten notebooks, a lot of hand recorded data, a lot of Excel spreadsheets that couldn't be emailed and sent around, things like that were always very frustrating to me. So that really spurred me in my career to kind of switch over to this digital side that we have found ourselves in now.
Mhm.
And that is, I think, going to be really important. And, I don't say that from a company Turing representative standpoint. This is not about our specific product. This is about the industry as a whole. I think is going that direction, and is going to need a lot of handholding and a lot of boldness to go
Yeah.
through those changes, and come out the other side something better and something different, I hope. So that's
Absolutely.
that's me. And then the other side of that is, as we talked about your geographical, I'm based in Phoenix, Arizona, so in the desert. I'm from California originally, so I've spent most of my life here in the desert Southwest, which again, has another set of very unique challenges when it comes to what works and what doesn't work, and what the
Right.
utilities are faced with. And obviously, I've been all over the place, all over the world, on somebody else's dime, which is great to have a sales or a service job that sends me all over the place. But I've gotten to see some unique perspectives. But yeah, from local stuff here in the greater desert Southwest,
Right.
it's a unique challenge, and it's one
Yeah.
that doesn't have. I think most of these challenges that these utility operators face, there is no one magic solution that works everywhere, which is one of the things that I think we'll probably end up talking about quite a lot on this podcast, is,
Yeah.
regional, what works regionally.
Yep. Yeah. And have they tried it? Have somewhere else?
Yeah.
Did you try it? Does it work? Let me try that because I've tried other things and it didn't work. Things that you mentioned there in your introduction that sparked interest for me: Excel spreadsheets, data gathering, where we're going, things of that nature. And the challenge with that is they're still doing all of that using Excel spreadsheets, using archaic systems, unfortunately. I think that's a lot of that has to do with the people outside of our industry don't understand what it takes to manage that industry. Funding is difficult for water and wastewater plants, which puts stress on these operators that we're wanting to talk to because they have to manage based on limited funds. That's really hard to do. We've heard the stories of people putting together pumps with 6 different parts, especially during COVID. We heard it just recently. We were at that event down in Florida. They talked about, yeah, during COVID, we didn't have off. We went to work every day to make sure that the waterways worked, and we couldn't get parts. Parts weren't available. So how did you manage that process? Well, we took parts from 6 different places and put it into this thing, and it worked for a while. That's ingenuity, and those are the things that you can't lose. And that's where the documentation becomes so important. And like you said, books. We had handwritten ledgers and logs and all of that. That all needs to be digitized. If something happens to people now, we're losing all of this industry knowledge. If that doesn't get uploaded into a solution of some kind to keep tabs, keep track, or whatever, you need to have that historical record. We're flooding all the time. Well, if it's in the cloud, it can flood the building. It's not going to flood the paperwork.
Yep, absolutely. And that transfer of institutional knowledge is something we have heard about at every event with every customer that we've talked to, I think,
Yep.
and something I think generally the industry as a whole likes to talk about quite a lot, but isn't sure really what to do with that yet. I think there's a lot of opportunities there for better solutions in that space. And then, the documentation side of thing is something I think we've talked about internally quite a lot. We've got all this equipment, we've got all these things and widgets, pumps, membranes, pressure vessels, tanks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And every single one of them has a mountain of documentation that comes with it and a whole bunch of recommendations and warranty terms and performance guarantees and all this other stuff. And so much of that is still just in a physical binder somewhere in a box, usually in storage, and it doesn't get talked about or looked at until somebody says, "Hey, what does the manual on that say?" And then somebody's got to go find the darn thing and get it out and dust it off, and then there's pages missing,
Right
all of
on.
that sort of stuff. That's I think again, there's lots of opportunities there for those sorts of improvements, and I think that's exactly what industry 2.0 or utility 2.0, whatever you want to term it, the digital transformation. I
Yep.
think that's exactly what it's trying to address is you really have to do that stuff first. And then from there, it gets easier to move into some of the more advanced, options that you have. We hear people talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning, and we talk about that. Our product,
Hmm.
we pitch that all the time. But
Sure.
it is a hard hill to walk up when you're still at the point of writing things manually in a logbook somewhere or
Yeah.
having a manual in a binder somewhere.
Exactly.
So,
Well, and we've talked about it 100 times.
yeah,
This is not just that portion of it. We are educators right now.
yep.
The one job I never wanted to do was be an educator, but here I am, and I actually enjoy it. So, when you're in the career path in school, they were like, "Hey, what's your job want to be?" And I'm like, "Well, don't want to be an educator." So, but we do it every day. And I think the education and adoption of this technology and what we're talking about as a whole, um, whether it's whoever we're talking to, is so important.
Yep.
We're still learning every day as well, Miller, that there's so much to be understood in this adoption of AI and ML and all that stuff that we're talking about or that we do talk about. And during these episodes and these series, I'm relying on how they're running it without it.
Yeah.
So I want to know how you run it without it and how do you see it benefiting you going forward? Is there a path there? Can you be more productive? Can you? Yeah, I think you can. I think there's a lot of options there, but those are the types of things that I'm looking at to keep this moving up versus stagnant. And we have to figure out a way during this education phase, how do we bring people to the table to adopt these technologies quicker? Whether it's ours, somebody else's, they need to still adopt it. So I don't care whose adoption you're doing, the silos of data is enormous in most of these utilities.
Yep.
And we have to figure out how to fix that and help people fix that. But the adoption is the key point to it. And it's hard to adopt new stuff because you're so busy doing your day-to-day operations.
Yep. Putting out fires
Exactly.
and keeping things running at the ragged edge of sustainability.
Yeah.
And it's functional. That's how a lot of treatment operations and distribution operations and collections operations have been for years and if not
Years.
decades.
Exactly.
Um, and some of that can't be helped. I mean, everything is always being pushed to the edge of its operational envelope, whether that's consumer grade electronics or everything that we do in our day-to-day
Yep.
lives. I think is we have to have that mindset. But I think technology can come in and alleviate some of that, make some of that better, make some of that smoother and easier. And that is a great transition point. We've kind of been introducing and talking here for about 15 minutes now, so I think we should probably get into the meat of the content that we wanted to talk about today in this first episode.
Yep.
And again, just as a reminder for folks, this episode is going to be a little bit different than the ones that we intend to do. We really want to have guests on here and actually talk to operators about their day-to-day. But for this first episode, this is more of an introductory thing. So we want to talk about sort of the state of the industry and what we see the challenges are from our perspective as professionals. And then that will hopefully sort of set the stage for what we're going to do in future episodes. So the first thing I wanted to jump to here, I kind of just to get some ideas about how to approach this subject, I really just typed in digital transformation water utilities sector into Google and started reading what came up. And there's some interesting stuff out there. And this is, nothing too surprising for folks like you and me who are working in this space already. But
Right.
there are some interesting articles that I found. So the one that I wanted to start with here, this is coming to us from nature.com. It's a peer-reviewed article. This is by Ivo Daniel, Nushike Ajami, Andrea Castelletti, Dragan Savic, Rodney A. Stewart, and Andrea Cominola. And it's addressing a survey of water utilities, digital transformation, drivers, impacts, and enabling technology. It's a very long article. It's a peer-reviewed article in the journal. Obviously, too much to go through. We could spend hours talking about this because it's quite a long thing. But the one thing I wanted to look at here is they sort of addressed what they thought was the easiest starting point among the larger water industry for these digital transformation tools. And their conclusion was that it is the water distribution segment. Clean water, potable water distribution is the easiest place for a utility to begin implementing these tools. And they talk about the reasons why. By the way, we will link all of these articles that we talk about, any journals, any of these sorts of media things that we find and want to talk about on the podcast here. We'll make sure those links are included in the description so that everybody can go and find and read these things for themselves.
Perfect.
Yeah. So it was interesting to me that they kind of came out and said, the distribution system is the easiest point to start with. Because it kind of it lines up a little bit with some of the stuff that we've heard out in the field, but not entirely. I think there are a lot of people who really want to begin applying these digital tools to the biggest pain point or the biggest, return on investment point, which is almost always going to be these complex treatment plants that have all these moving parts and all these things that you can optimize. And it feels like those are the best places to start because they're the biggest return, but they're also the biggest hill to climb up in terms of getting there.
Right.
And it does sort of line up that, water distribution systems they're not simple by any means, but they're simpler than something like a sewage collection system or a treatment plant. And might be a good way to approach that if you're a utility looking for how do we get into this space, how do we even start going through a digital transformation journey. Maybe there's your answer, and at least it's something to consider is start with the low hanging fruit, as it were.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I think that's great. I think one of the things that I think about when we talk about the water side of it is the revenue side of it. Water treatment plants, when they produce water, they send it through the pipes and then they need to collect money on what they send through the pipes. So the easiest path that I think is monitoring your distribution network system, because then it allows you to look for potential leaks, potential failures, things of that nature. Because if you're losing water, you're losing money. And that's a non-starter. You have to collect everything that you're producing because we are limited on funds anyways. And I'll talk about funds a lot because I think it's so important. to make sure that we have the funds in order to continue to upgrade these facilities, upgrade the piping, everything associated to it. I think that's very important for us to focus on as well. And again, as we talk about these solutions and as we talk about these different pieces of the puzzle, all of it has to work together. And I think that's where you have to look at. And I like the article. What it's saying is you start with one area and then you can adopt it more technologies under a single platform. And that's where the uniqueness comes in some of these areas. You're trying to get rid of silos. Don't add a solution that's siloed and then can't attach something else to it. Because if you keep adding silos of data, you're creating more work for yourself anyway. So look for something that, in my opinion, you can bring it in and just keep adding solutions to it and adopt over time. I think mass adoption of any of these solutions is very, very challenging. So that's kind of my opinion on it. I'm sure there's differing opinions, but I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, and it's an interesting article. Like I said, it'll be linked below, and I would encourage anybody who's interested in this stuff to go and have a full read of it. It is quite a long piece that they've written. But yeah, I mean, I just it's interesting to me because I struggle with decision overload, as it were, when trying to start something new. I often find myself sitting here thinking, okay, what is the starting point to whatever problem I'm trying to solve? Right now it's the example from my own personal life is my wife's car had an issue, and so we're now going through the process of figuring, okay, do we repair the car? Do we trade it in and buy a new car? Do we want to switch from a gas vehicle to an electric vehicle or a plug-in hybrid or something like that?
Right.
And going through and how do I even start researching some of these options that I've got and starting to understand these things, because it's something that happened unexpectedly, and I feel like I'm behind the eight ball a little bit. And I suspect these utilities and utility managers out there may feel the same way, where they are looking for and struggling for that entry point, that just give me one easy point to start with, and then from there I can get a toehold and start climbing this hill. But not knowing where to start, I think we get that option paralysis, that decision overload that stops us in our tracks. I think that's a very human thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting article.
Yeah. I think another area we should look at, I mean, just as conversational, we said we were going to be conversational on this. I think we should look at just automating reporting. That would be something that people should look at. We spend a lot of time generating reports for regulatory requirements, to DNRs, to state regulatory agencies, just getting something to take the data, put it into something and send it, I think that could be a huge time saver for a lot of people. So again, I want people, when we're listening, and think of anything that you think could be automated. Let's talk about it. Let's see if it can be automated. Can it make your life easier? What can we do to make it more efficient? Those are the things I think we should be looking at. And, the challenges with these processes are the regulations getting stricter every single day. We were just down at that event, and I mean, I'll reference Florida again because it's fresh in my mind, but all the PFAS regulations that are coming down the pipeline, that monitoring of PFAS is going to be insane. I mean, the levels that they're tracking, the amount of sampling they have to do, where they're going to log it, that should be something I think people should really be talking about, someone to automate. I would love to be that person, but talk to somebody, because it's going to be a big task, a huge time. I mean, I think that's someone's full-time job. And you're already limited on staff. It's hard to find good staff, trained staff, things of that nature. And you're going to put someone that has to do that pretty much full time. That's going to be a lot of work.
Absolutely. And shout out to the American Membrane Technology Association and the Southeast Desalting Association for hosting that one-day utility managers workshop. That's the one that we keep referencing, that we attended in Florida last week. And it was very eye-opening. A lot of regional issues, but hearing, about some more general things like what Kirk is talking about. And there was a lot of conversation around that workshop specific to, there's always something in terms of things that sneak up on utility managers and operators that they then have to deal with, whether that be, it was pharmaceuticals in the last decade or so, and now it's PFAS, and these related substances. And then, now we're talking about microplastics and other micropollutants, and there's going to be a
Hmm.
next thing as well. And it's highly likely that these things are going to end up with regulation, like what we've
Hmm.
seen happen with PFAS, that's going to be complex, it's going to be new, and you're going to be time boxed on having to address these things. And yeah, I mean, you can take that on manually if you want to, but I don't think I would want to if I were in those shoes. I think I would be looking for tools that could help me do that. And again, I say that as somebody who works for a company that builds a tool like that. So there's some inherent bias there, I think, from my perspective. But I sure wouldn't want to take that stuff on manually. Seeing the presentation that we saw from some of the consulting engineers around I believe that they used the term chutes and ladders of the sort of decision tree around,
Yes.
okay, well, if you've had this much or this many violations in a certain amount of time, you then have to do this level of reporting. But then if you don't have that, you've got this other level of reporting. And then if you have a baseline value that's been established, then there's a different set of reports that you have to do. But if you don't have a baseline value, you default to this other reporting structure. I mean, it is a lot for just
Hmm.
one thing. I mean, that's just one thing that an operator has to deal with in a day-to-day operation. And yeah, it's tough.
Exactly.
And there's going to be more of those things coming down the pipe. Which
100%.
brings me, yeah, which brings me to, I think that's a good segue to the second article I wanted to reference. So this is more of it's kind of a white paper slash maybe a little bit marketing thing from McKinsey and Company, which is a business consultant. But they put out a really pretty good article, I think, on digital in the utility industry. So this is
Mm.
speaking to all utilities, power, gas, and water
Yep.
in the United States. And this was from March of 2023, so fairly recent here,
Okay.
or at least recent as the utility industry goes. And they brought up some good points. They talked about the types of questions that need to be asked when thinking about these issues, and define some terms, define some things about what digital transformation is likely to look like, what these platforms look like. I think it's a very good overall sort of primer on what digital transformation is within this
Mm.
utility space.
Okay.
And you can read all that again. This will be linked down below
Sure.
if you want to read it yourself. But the one that I thought was a point that they brought up that I think is worth talking about is this all is predicated on management and leadership taking new approaches to solve problems in the utility space and in the vendors that approach trying to sell these products into that utility space. And they talk a little bit about, changing the way companies do business, changing to be a little bit more sort of software and tech focused. And that's a little bit of a touchy subject, I think, because I think people are maybe untrusting of the tech world, especially as it relates to consumer products. But
Sure.
I think they derive a good point here in this idea of, if you want to use these tools approach problems in a different way than you would do it if you were approaching it manually. And
Mhm.
therefore, if you want to use these tools to solve problems, you also have to approach your problems with a slightly different mindset.
Right.
And that doesn't mean you have to give over your operation to artificial intelligence and never make a decision again as a human being. I really hope no one is thinking in those terms. And I think, Kirk, you've heard me talk about this at
Oh yeah.
various presentations. We don't want to build Skynet, if you're familiar with the Terminator movies for anyone listening. That's not what anybody's trying to do here in this space. But we do want to change the way people make decisions because it has to change in order to be faster and more efficient. You can't do what you're doing now if you're trying to get better. You have to allow that sort of change. And it's, I think, not an easy thing for leadership, especially in risk averse situations like when you're dealing with somebody's drinking water or
Mm.
wastewater. It's hard to take risks in those scenarios, or what it's hard to take what you might perceive as risks in those scenarios. And I think it's on the companies addressing these spaces like us to really build that trust and do this sort of education stuff that we're trying to do to make people understand the risk here is mitigated, and the payoff of taking those risks far outweighs the potential downsides. At least that's the way I look at it. Is that, you agree with that?
Well, I think, talking to utilities on a regular basis, pretty much every single day, the tech tools are fantastic. I think they love the idea of the tech tools. Managers love the technology, but the adoption of the technology is where you run into the most of the challenges. I don't think it's the CEOs or utility managers not saying they want to do whatever they can to manage that business, because they're all businesses, to manage that business as effective as possible. So they're happy to look at those tools. Where the challenge comes in is when they start using these tools, the disappearance of that tool. There's so many startups in this space. It's a real challenge to say, hey, we just started last week and we're adopting this technology, and a year later they're gone. So I think that's a big problem. That's why I think you have to have these platforms that have multiple pieces, because if you're just one piece, there's a challenge with that if you're just one piece of the puzzle. So SCADA is the platform that pretty much every single utility uses, some form, whatever company's SCADA system it is. SCADA is a great platform for the operators to utilize, but it's not a digital AI ML learning machine either. So I think we've got to have that understanding as well. SCADA's, I think there's just so many different things that we have to look at and adopt and manage and focus on, that it becomes really complicated for these utilities to do all of this. And that the big one for me when I think about the adoption is the disappearance. That's the trust factor you just spoke about. How do we gain trust to know that this is going to be here? Because these types of solutions are not solutions that we're going to bring to the table, and they don't need someone to manage it. We're not a Microsoft where we just say, pay the fee, here's the software, and have fun with it. That's not how it works. So being able to be there to support them, which is part of your role, which I think helps that platform. I'm talking to them, telling them all the wonderful things it can do, and then you have to make it all work. And all the back end people and all the developers and all the UI interfacers. And, there's a ton of work on the back end that goes through with this. And that's why we're seeing few companies make it. And I think that's something people have to understand. It takes an army to get to this level of technology. It's not, 5 people and they said, yeah, we just started this company and we're running AI ML. I mean, there's thousands of lines of code. I mean, I'm learning the back end of it. And it's really fascinating how much work it takes to get one line to go across the screen. And we have these super complex. And the other part of that, the reason I bring those things up is these plants are so complex. How can you run these plants with more stringent regulations, more complexity, because they're constantly developing, each manufacturer is developing new stuff. And then it has a program of itself. And where's that program going? To an individual platform. And then you got to go to that platform to look at the blower. And then you got to look at this one for the DO. And then you got to look at this one for the clarifier. I mean, it can get, and obviously SCADA is incorporating a lot of that, but it can become overwhelming. And I think that's where we need to really focus on simplifying the process by using automation to help simplify it. So that's kind of one of my big things, is helping to simplify the very complex process with automation. I think is huge.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point there, Kirk, and something that I think is really important, and that I've been thinking about a lot recently is, I think tech companies in this space and in general, or at least in serving sort of industrial, non-consumer products, don't do a very good job of showing their work. And it's very hard to do that in some of these cases because you're dealing with sensitive data and sensitive information. But seeing now from how the sausage is made, building a platform like this and doing real software engineering and data science, and applying things like machine learning and artificial intelligence, and reinforcement learning, like our team has been doing, the amount of work and effort that goes into that just to build something that works as a starting point, and not necessarily even like the finished product, but just getting it to the point where it'll do something that you want it to do in a kind of functional way is a massive undertaking with a lot of really, really intelligent people putting in a lot of hours to make this happen. And it's one of those questions that I think comes up occasionally, in new spaces, in sort of, when you get industries that are on the edge of pushing forward into sort of a new era, is you get all these startup companies that are all pushing for a certain amount of market share. And obviously not all of them can survive. Some of them are going to, fail. Some of them are going to get acquired by other companies and smashed into conglomerates. We know all that's sort of going to happen in this space as well. It already is, in fact, happening in this space. But I think a lot of the end users for these products end up looking at it and going, well, why couldn't I just build that myself? Why don't I just hire a software engineer and a data scientist and let them build me my own thing? And the answer to that is, sure, you can do that. Go ahead. But don't underestimate the amount of work and effort and time it takes to build something functional in that space, because it seems trivial. And especially when you look at these really slick UIs that people build, and
Oh yeah.
there's a lot of really impressive pieces of software out, even in this fledgling utility service space. There's a lot of really impressive looking pieces of software out there, and it's easy to look at that and go, yeah, a couple hours, and hire a software
Oh yeah.
engineer off of Fiverr, and yeah, no problem. And I think only the really big mega utilities might have the resources to actually do that for themselves, but the rest of them, it would be a real struggle to do that in a coherent and
Yep.
productive way. It would take way longer than you think, with way more effort than you think, and way more problems than you think to do that. And I think that the tech companies need to do a better job of showing what type of work goes into this stuff. And I think that's, I mean, probably a part of what we want to do on this podcast from a education. We want to hear from operators and hear what their day to day is like, but we also want to talk, I think, a little bit about what our day to day is like, not in a commercial sort of, here's our product and here's how great it is sort of way, but more in a,
Right.
here's how much work this takes and how much time has been put into this, and the wins and the losses and the things that can still get better.
Right.
And I think that will go a long way, maybe toward helping to educate some folks about, how difficult this stuff really is. And it's the same question I ask when anybody brings something up like this is, well, if again, we'll stick with the water treatment plant example. Why can't I build my own digital platform? Well, do you build your own valves? Do you roll your own steel manifolds? No, no, of course not. Do you cast and coat your own RO membranes? Do you have a cast and coating machine and a bunch of polymer scientists on board? No, of course not. You pay for somebody else's product to do that. You could. There's nothing stopping you from buying a casting coating machine, making your own flat sheet membrane, and then buying an auto roller and having it rolled up, and all the stuff that goes into making an RO membrane, for example. But it would not really make sense from a return on investment and a return on your time,
Right.
especially when there's companies out there who want to just sell you that thing and it'll work. And so I think we need to try and help the industry, or I want to help the industry adopt that same sort of mindset when it comes to these digital tools,
Right.
because there are a lot of good companies out there working in this space. And again, I say that as somebody who sells these products, but I'm talking about the industry as a whole right now. There's a lot
Oh
of good
yeah.
options out there.
There's a lot of options. There's a lot of really, really smart people in this industry, that people think it's not a glamorous job, but there's some, it's pretty impressive. I know that I've met some really, really smart people, and proud to be sitting next to them and talking to them and learning from them, really, learning from these individuals. And it's been really fun to meet some of the younger folks as they're coming in as well, learning this process. One of the things that I want to make sure that we ask on every single podcast is how you got into this business, because not too many people go to school and say, boy, I want to be a wastewater treatment plant manager, or I want to be an operator and go in the sewers and collect stuff, or whatever that is. So that, I think, is going to be a fun topic, and a fun question to ask every single one of these potential podcast guests. So I'm excited about that.
Absolutely, and I think that's a good segue out here. So We would love to hear from you. If you're an operator or a utility manager, if you're somebody out in the field, and we're not asking anybody to come on and talk about all the things that are wrong with their organization or their utility. We just want to hear what
No.
your day to day is like. And like Kirk said, how did you get into this? What works? What doesn't? What's a struggle? What could be better? And it doesn't even have to be related to digital stuff like what we do at Turing. It can be anything you want to talk about. If you got stories to tell, if you have something to
Yeah,
say about that operation space, let us know, and we'd love to have you as a guest on the show. Um, I think that's
absolutely.
I think that's going to do it for this first initial episode of the Fluid Operations podcast. Kirk, this has been great. This has been really fun. I'm looking forward to doing more of these.
Miller, I
I
loved it.
we're going to get better at this. This is from Kirk and I both. This is the first time we've tried to do anything like this, so I think we will have a learning curve here as hosts. Special thanks to Megan Moore, who is our marketing manager at Turing, who has also helped us do a lot of the setup and get a lot of the equipment that we need to actually
Yeah.
do this as if we know what we're doing. And with that, I think we will let this one come to an end, and we will see you the next time around.
Thanks, Miller. We'll see you next time.
Very good.